What's going on, creatives? So I'm going on this journey to learn n8n, and I thought I would bring you along with me because I imagine that there are a lot of you who were like me when it came to this tool. Is that you get inside of it, you look at the videos, the YouTube videos, it gets a little confusing, can't quite figure it out, and so you leave it alone. Well, I've decided that I'm going to actually approach this in a more strategic way. And we can kind of work our way through this process and build up our skill sets to build out some really cool and valuable workflows. So let's talk about the first hangup I had. The biggest issue I had to overcome is that abstraction. I hear this a lot in the YouTube videos is that, n8n is an abstraction, but technically speaking, all code is an abstraction. So when we think about machine code, ones and zeros, well, then you put assembly. That's an abstraction of machine code. And then on top of assembly, we put a lower language model like C++ or C++. And then we do object-oriented language like JavaScript and Python, so a higher level language. And then we do another abstraction, and that is n8n and make.com. So it's all an abstraction. But when you look at this, so my issue comes with this. I look at this and I see 3 nodes. So my abstraction of this is 3 nodes. When I look, so I see 1, let's see, here's 2, this is 3, this is 4. And technically speaking, this could probably only be 3 nodes. Well, when I went to Claude and asked it to get me a n8n template with this code, it turns out that this short code required 8 nodes. And that is where I struggled because this looks like a node. This here looks like a node. There's 3 and there's 4. In order to learn this, I decided to back up and just use a basic learning technique that is part of all instructional design models. Anyone who's a trainer, instructional designer, curriculum developer, they know about scaffolding. And basically it's saying that you're going to stack your knowledge. Let's say, for example, here I learn A, and then I'm going to take part of A and I'm going to expand that project to make it A and B. And then the next project, I'll take A and B and add C. So this is scaffolding in a nutshell. But the thing we had to do is that we had to be able to pick some projects and in order to do this. So when I thought about, okay, this is the approach, well, how do I pick the right projects? And this is what I came up with. I realized that these 5 things are really where the issue comes into play. So one is build things you already know how to build. So if you use make.com, if you've used code, you've built things, well, you're basically going to take those things, pull them apart into a single purpose use. So, and that's number 2, build a single purpose workflow, not a project. So we're not trying to build an agent. We're not trying to build complicated workflows. We just want a simple thing of, can it search Dropbox? Can I create an embedding? So very simple, single purpose workflows. And then we slowly build up the complexity. So as you go along, you make it slightly more complex, but not that much more complex. All right. And we're going to start with the HTTP request nodes and not the specialized nodes. We're going to throw a few nodes in there, Google, Dropbox, but there's some complicated nodes in n8n. We're going to avoid all of them. Okay. Focus on data transformation between nodes. This is the this is probably where n8n falls apart for most people. It is actually getting the data from one node to the next. How do we get information across all of these nodes? And then finally, the basic workflows. So here are the basic workflows. It's not in order how I built them, but these are the seven workflows that I built to help me kind of better understand n8n. All right. So now that we've gone through all of that, let's go ahead and jump into each one of these nodes. Okay, let's start with, this is the basic overflow. Now I'm running n8n locally. So this is on my local drive. I didn't sign up for the account with the 14-day free plan, free trial, and then you have to pay monthly. I just decided to run it locally. But one of the things that I like about this is that we have this personal, and then we have folders. So now I have a folder of all of my sample projects that I can just work with. All right, so we're going to start with my sample projects, and we're going to start with the very first one, simple image analyzer. And go back to our fundamental thing. Remember, we said that the first thing we wanted to focus on was HTTP requests and just transferring data between the nodes. And so this is what I focus on, and this is a simple thing I do quite a bit. And here's the issue. So I would have thought that get the link and do the analysis were the only two nodes I needed. So this, we get the link, and I just put in a link from an image on a server. We then upload the link to Gemini, which I wouldn't have expected that I needed to do this step, but we need to do this step. And then in Gemini, we actually will analyze the image and then finally convert it to a file. So let's go ahead and run this so we can see how it works. So the first one is a manual trigger. It goes through, does the analysis, and converts the file. So let's take a look at this. And you can see that we have our link, and then it produced a binary file, and here's the image. So this was just to get the actual image. Now that we have the image, you can see here we have the post, the URL, and what you will notice is that we have this question mark here. And we have the query authentication. And so if we look at this Gemini key, you can see we go back to what I said before. You have a key, and then you have the value. But here's the deal about this query authentication. This is a prototype authentication, meaning that we don't put this authentication into production. Because what happens is that when you run this, it is going to append this API key to this link, giving people access to your API key. So this is not a production ready API method. This is only for prototyping. And because we're using AI Studio, which is a prototype software, or is for prototyping. AI Studio is from Google, is for prototyping. Okay. So we have everything. We get our API key, and then we have the output, which is here. And finally, we have to send that image over to Google to do the analysis. We're using Gemini 1.5 Flash. And then here is the prompt that we're sending it. And you can see the structure of the JSON. Once we have that, we can run the file, and you can see that we have our analysis. So this was straightforward. It only took me a few minutes to actually learn how to set this up. You can get it done pretty fast. All right. The next workflow. So we can analyze the image. Let's talk about generating an image. So if we go to my image generation, now this one is different. So you can see we've added in a couple of nodes. We have our HTTP request, but we added in this code and we added in this if statement. And basically, we're just kind of doing a loop here for this. So let's talk about how this works. First, the submission form. This is just to get the prompt. So rather than typing in a prompt, rather than hard coding a prompt, I just will have a form. It submits the prompt. This will get the prompt. And you can see we're using Replicate. We're using the Black Forest Labs Flux 1.1 Pro model, and then Replicate API key. We have our header, content type, application JSON. This is always pretty much the way it is. And then here is our prompt. And you can see I have the description of it, but I hard coded in this style. All right, so we hard code in this style, but you can see the prompt is coming from here. And so let's go ahead and run this one at a time. So if I run this, okay, so I've ran that node, and what I can do now is come in here. We have this node. Now, one of the things I like about n8n is I can do this. I can pin this. And I really like this because now this information is set here. I don't have to fill out this form again because it's pinned to it. Okay. So now that's pinned. Let's go ahead and run the next node. And you can see the next node comes in and says, okay, we're going to take this information and then we're going to actually build out and send the prompt up to Replicate. And then here is the full prompt. Whenever you're running with Replicate and with Black Forest Lab, it's a prediction, so you need the prediction ID to actually get the link to the actual image. So we got that. And then we run the wait. And the wait is simply giving enough time for the API to actually create the image. Now, how much time that needs? Typically, I would say I have this set for just 10 seconds. And then we get our prediction ID, we get our original prompt. And now we can get the link. So we can come in here, we see this, get everything, and now we can use this prediction ID to go get the actual link. Let's execute that. So now we've gotten a link. Here is the output. This is the image that it created. So what happens is that this if statement is here to check to see, did we actually get the link? So that's what we're doing here. We're basically checking, did we actually get an image? If not, we return back to the wait 10 more seconds, and then try to get the link. All right. So we did get an image. There's our output. We can view it, and here's the image. And the final step is that we put it in the Dropbox. So we have it in the Dropbox. Okay. Once we execute that, it goes through and then downloads it to my Dropbox account, right? And it's downloading it in this path here. Now, one thing I found is interesting is that this is a binary file. So you have to have this selected. This input is a binary field, but although you can do fixed and expression, you actually have to put in data, but it has to have expression. It has to be an expression, not a fixed. I did discover that. And again, I may have to go into way more details and set up a Dropbox account because this is rather tricky. All right. So this was the second one. In the third one, it was a simple one. I just want to search my Dropbox. That's it. And so I come in, we have the Dropbox account, and then this time the source is a search, operations is a query, and the query is get the images. These are the active files, return a limit of 7, and look inside of this folder. So if I execute it, you can see that limit 7 reached. And we can then come here and get the links to those, images. Okay, so we have our 7 items. This is the JSON field. We're just pulling in all of the actual links to the field. Okay, so that's all I wanted to do with this one, was search Dropbox. I didn't want to do anything else with it, just a simple thing of searching the Dropbox, which would allow me to work with other things when it comes to Dropbox. Okay. Now, the loop image analyzer. But in this one, I hard-coded the links. So because I wanted, again, when we're doing something like this, what you want is really hard code the things you can. We're only focusing on one thing, and that was the loop. So you can see that this we've already done. We've already done this. That was in the very first workflow. This we've done in all of the workflow. So this is done. We hard code this. So the only thing we're focusing is that loop. And so again, when we talk about the single purpose, when you're creating your projects, hard code or and use duplicates of other nodes that you've already built, where you can then isolate what you're trying to learn here. We're just trying to learn how to loop. Okay. And the loop, it kind of works like make.com. Whenever you're using make.com, you have to loop through something. There are 2 nodes that always show up, and split out and loop over time. These 2 nodes just seem to live together. Okay, so if we run this, let's go ahead and execute this so we can see what happens. All right, let's go to the split out while that's doing that. All right, so you can see that it went through, and we're bringing in all of the files are here, and then we split them into 5 different links. So here's our 5 that splits out, and then the loop just loops through those 5. And so when it's done with those 5, it will then take those and download them. So now you can see we have an analysis of all 5 images. Okay. But the main thing that I want to point out here is that this we created earlier. We've already created that. This was hard-coded. This was the only thing we wanted to learn how to do. And if you look at what a loop function looks like, it's just this. It's just a batch size of 1, and it's just looping through and sending them through. Okay. So that's it. Very easy node to understand, but it's one of those things where it was easy to build because we've already done, again, we did this part and we hard coded this. Okay. All right. So we've been working with images. One thing we want to also work with YouTube transcripts. Okay. We always want to get a YouTube transcript. So I have a pinned YouTube here. So there's my YouTube link. And this code is simply going to extract the YouTube video ID, because that's what we need for the actual transcript to take place. Okay, we need just the video ID. So if we execute this, and you can see I have a couple of things pinned. I have this pinned, and I have this pinned, and this is really just a save. Here's when we talk about these pinned items. What we're doing is that every time we run this, we would incur some type of cost with the API key. But if we pin it, we can avoid that cost. Okay, so if I run this the first time, then if I'm really working on, let's say, the Gmail or file conversion, then I'm going to pin this information so I don't have to keep running my API key and getting charged for it. So that's the point of having it pinned. And then we have our Google Drive. But we take the information, we put in a download to Google Drive. I give it a name. I tell it the drive. And this is pretty much it. All right. Now, all of those happen to really deal with images and with video, but what about data? And so the next one was kind of wrapping my head around, am I going to use some type of embeddings and RAG or something like that? So I wanted to start off with something simple, and that was using the Pinecone. So this one will take more videos because we have to understand what's going on the Pinecone side of things in order to understand what's happening here. But it's just a form submission that uploads the file. The file gets uploaded to my vector store. We get a namespace, and the namespace just allows me to categorize the different embeddings. So we can have wine-game. The next one could maybe be wine-regions. The next set of data could be wine-soils. So it just allows you to categorize your embeddings a little bit more to get the better context. Okay. We're using the OpenAI embeddings. Yep. So we're using OpenAI embeddings, and we're using the recursive character splitter. And this is basically, if you've ever worked with embeddings, you know how sensitive they can be to where you cut off your chunks. And so this allows us to overlap the chunks. So if, let's say, one embedding gets cut off in the middle of the paragraph or something, then the next embedding will back up 50 whatever points or however that is. It will back up and bring in some of that context over to the next chunk. And it just allows to keep some consistency and contextual information together. But embeddings I think embeddings require a little bit more effort to get the type of information that you want because they can be tricky. But that's all this was. And then the final one was really looking at the OpenAI RAG. And so I have the embedding. How do I use the embeddings to talk with ChatGPT? And I really wish they had the connection to the vector store in OpenAI, but they don't. So I have to use Pinecone. But what we did here is that we're going to ask a question about wine, and then we will do an HTTP request for embeddings, because here's the thing, when you are searching your embeddings, you actually have to create a vector of the question. Okay, so it's not just text that can look at a vector store. You have to actually have to create a vector store of that question. And that's what this does. Okay. And then this just takes the embeddings, put it up on Pinecone, and then this will ask the actual question and return the output. Okay. So if we run this, okay, let's say simple question, what is the best wine to go with steak? You can see here that here's our embedding. So it took that question, created a vector for it. This debugging here was just so I could check to make sure that that is exactly what we were sending. We were actually sending these embeddings. So this was just for me to throw it and check. We can delete this now that it's gone, but that's all that was just the check. So here's the request, and then here is the return. And you can see that we have some questions. And one thing about embeddings, we have this. We can probably filter this out because we get this score. Okay, so we got this Malbec. Let's see, this is, well, and you can see we're getting 20 out of 10. So you can see we're getting the evaluations here. And so once we have that, here's my OpenAI. So I'm using O4 Mini. I'm just telling it I have my typical instructions. So I'm giving it the score, and then I'm telling it how to evaluate which wine to choose, and it came back with a Cabernet Sauvignon. Okay. And we convert that to a file, and here it is. Okay. So this was the last one, and this one was tricky, but it wasn't that bad. But the main thing here, and I'm going to share all of these with you. So I will share these notes with you so you get started. But what I would do is, the thing that I would do is that I would go in and I would just move this down here and rebuild it. Or just open up in another screen and look at it, and then just go through the process of building these. Okay. So if you don't want to deal with Dropbox or with your Google Drive, then just do a convert to file. Just do a convert to file. Okay. And then you can avoid all of that. So if you don't want to deal with that, just use a convert to file and use that. But the main thing of it is that as we're going through this, it's a matter of understanding how this works, how to get through it, and then how we build on it. Okay. I will start sharing what I'm learning, and I think it'll be interesting to see what I can build with n8n. All right. So that's it, and I am out.